Today we're speaking with Alex Bruner, and he just had his uncle's uh, memoir, I guess you can call it, republished. It's called Crematorium. His uncle was in one of the in several camps during the Holocaust, and the book that he just had republished was his time in Auschwitz. And I welcome to the program, Alex. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so that, I'm reading some of the reviews of the book. The New York Times says, they have so much praise for it. An immediate a confrontation of the horrors of the camps as I've ever encountered. That's what the reviewer says, and talks about a depiction of hell at once personal, communal, and atmospheric. What was it about your uncle? His name was Alex. Well, it was József Bruner, but he went by a pen name, József Debreczeni. Am I right?
József Debreczeni, yes.
You can do it better than I can. Good. Talk about that. What was it in this book that is so gripping?
Well, my uncle was both a poet and a journalist, and he is able to use the skills of a journalist capturing detail, but at the same time, he has this beautiful poetic language that really makes you feel like you're right there with him. And people have told me, I felt when József describes, for example, being close to a cadaver. Yes. They're sleeping, and the cadaver is getting colder and colder. You feel it on your own skin, that coldness.
In fact, I can read that to you. He talks about having a new neighbor isn't a surprise. So far, I've had to report 8 corpses in the mornings, which has meant, among other things, that I've passed 8 nights pressed against a cooling cadaver. You can get used to anything. Close quarters of this sort have meant being there as every dying man soils himself in his final moments and sitting up a corpse to get extra food. Wow.
Yes, yes. So they would dole out the food. They called it food, right. A piece of bread, and they would fling it at anybody who looked like they were alive. So the inmates were desperate for calories. That was the one thing that permeated every aspect of their life. We get about 1,800 to 2,000 calories a day. They got 600 calories, and they had to work. So, hunger drove everything, and even made people do some despicable things. He describes, for example, how a father and a son would fight over a scrap of stale bread. But he knew how to use language. He even used humor. He used irony. He used humor. And he really was able to make this book into something special. It has been recognized as a masterpiece. And you mentioned that it was republished. It wasn't really republished. He wrote in Hungarian. He wrote the book in 1950. It was translated in 1951 into Serbo-Croatian, which was the main language of Yugoslavia. Yes. And then it just languished in those two, even though it was recognized in those societies. And by the way, when I say Hungarian, this was in Yugoslavia. Hungarian was a minority language of Yugoslavia.
It was never printed
but
in
nowhere
Hungary.
Else. Yeah, nowhere else until
Hungary didn't. Right. We're talking about Hungary, but never printed in Hungary, correct?
Well, it has been printed now in 2024.
Right. Exactly.
Because in Hungary, until the fall of communism, the fact that the Shoah, the Holocaust, was specific to Jews. And Jews were murdered because they were Jews. And Hitler's ideology was to destroy every last human, every man, woman, and child, Jew.
In the world.
Not the world. Yeah, and they already have, and I have a slide, you saw my presentation, I have a slide which shows that Hitler already had lists of Jews in Canada and in the US for the day when the Nazis would conquer North America. But they didn't get to it. But in Europe, in occupied Europe, they largely succeeded. They destroyed entire communities.
You mentioned that there were 42,000 sites that
Yes.
talk about
Yes. So historians have identified 42,500 sites where Jews in occupied Europe were gathered, were sent to ghettos, were transported, were shot, became slaves, were murdered on the spot. 42,500. I show a map which has a pattern of dots all over it. And each of those dots actually is the main camp, and there are sub-camps around each of those dots.
Right. And this is separate and apart from Russia, right?
Yes.
Right?
Well, no, the 42, the map I show is what was called Greater Germany, does not include Russia, does not include Ukraine, which were, of course, the main killing fields in World War II.
Okay, right. So that the 42,000 encompasses those. Okay, okay. So yeah. So when did you come across this book?
Well, I first came across it. I was born in 1951, so I was just a little child. But I remember distinctly how my parents and other people who would take this little book out of the bookcase would handle it with great reverence, and that always stuck with me. And of course, then when I became a teenager, I understood what the book meant for. It was the story of the family, but it was more than that. It was the story of the Jewish people in World War II. And unfortunately, my father tried very hard to get the book translated. He was a Yugoslavian diplomat, and he happened to be stationed in Washington, D.C. in the early 50s. So he had access to the book. He spoke perfect English. He was a pusher, and he was totally unable to get American publishers interested. They were petrified. This was the era of McCarthy. They were petrified. It was the Rosenberg trials, and they wouldn't touch the book. And the reason they wouldn't touch the book is because the Soviets are shown as the liberators, which they were. And my father always said that the deaths, the nail in the coffin was the last paragraph, where the remaining prisoners leave the camp, the last camp in which József was imprisoned, and they are singing the Internationale, which is the communist anthem.
Yes,
yeah.
And that was it. That was it.
That was it.
When you tried to get it republished, and I forget how many languages you're still doing more. How many languages have you gotten?
It is available now in 16 languages. We will have it within a few months in 20 languages. These are all major publishers in their markets. The English edition came out as Penguin Random House and Macmillan. Those are two of the five major powerhouses in the English language, which is very unusual that they would collaborate on bringing this book out. So it's one of the top 10 books on the New York Times list for 2024.
You approached several publishers, many publishers. Only one rebuffed you. Tell me about that.
Well, this one was very open. They said, we're not going to publish this. We don't want to be involved because we believe this book could create sympathy for Israel. So this was very explicit. Whether I was turned down by other publishers in a more polite and genteel way, I will never know.
Right. But the fact is that it is being read, and have you heard ordinary people commenting about it?
Anybody who's read the book has been deeply impacted. Some people tell me that they can't stop reading; they're up all night, and some people say it's just so compelling and so powerful. They have to stop. They have to stop sometimes for days before resuming.
So it's interesting. You gave a presentation in Boca West in Florida the other day, and the place was fit, every seat was taken. So that's at least 200 people, maybe more, I don't know. But to what do you ascribe such interest now in the Holocaust when, I mean, since the TV program Holocaust began, I forget what year it was in the 80s, that's when people started to, again, until then, there was very little talk about the Holocaust. People came back, they wanted to forget about it, the survivors and whatnot. It wasn't talked about. Then after that, we've seen a lot of talk about it. Just had the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. That was commemorated worldwide, United Nations, etc. To what do you ascribe the fact that this book is also getting so much attention?
Well, I think the book is a literary masterpiece, and people have compared it to Primo Levi. They've compared it to Alexander Solzhenitsyn's, One Day in the Gulag, and I think it tells it the way it is, and I think there's an understanding among people that we need to know what happened. And many of the books are what my uncle called limonade, lemonades. In other words, they portray something that was statistically improbable. For example, Gentiles, who are the heroes, who are saving the Jews. It happened, and these righteous Gentiles, of course, were shining stars in a very dark universe, but statistically, it was insignificant. So I think there is a hunger to know, and I think people understand that with the rise of anti-Semitism, some of these old prejudices are taking on new uniforms. In fact, my uncle has a book, has a poem. He was a poet, if more than anything else, which is a prefaces the book. And he speaks about my mother's killer finding a new uniform. Now, when he wrote it, this was 1950, he was still hoping, it turned out to be a naive hope, that the actual war criminals would be brought to justice. Unfortunately, in almost all cases, that did not happen. With a few exceptions, they got away scot-free. But in a way, he was a student of Jewish history. He knew Jewish history. He mentions, for example, in the book, what happened in a pogrom in the Ukraine 2 centuries ago. And he experienced anti-Semitism on his own skin. At the end of World War I, he and his family fled the White Terror in Budapest to go to the neighboring Kingdom of Yugoslavia. That's how he ended up in Yugoslavia. Later on, he's invited back to Budapest, but the honeymoon is short-lived. Within 6 years, he is thrown out. So he knew Jewish history, and he would have recognized the new uniforms of the Jew haters.
You mentioned the stories about righteous Gentiles. I'm thinking of Schindler's List when you said that. Maybe you were thinking of it too. And I remember seeing the movie and then interviewing Ben Kingsley, who was a major character in the movie. And as we finished the interview, he said, "Well, you think it's going to be a hit?" I said, "No." He said, "No, why?" I said, "I think it's too graphic. I don't think the general public will have the stomach for it. They won't want to see it." He said, "Well, I hope you're wrong." I said, "I hope so too." And I guess the movie was a hit, and people did have the stomach for it. And that's what you're finding: Jew and non-Jew buying your book, buying your uncle's book.
Well, I don't have, of course, I don't have numbers, but I can tell you that in Germany, the book came out in October, and it's been a huge hit. It's been reviewed very positively in every major German newspaper. It's been on the radio. Discussions of it have been on radio, on TV, and they've run out of books, and they're doing another production run in Germany. Who is buying it? I don't know. I do believe that there's enormous interest within the Jewish community, but of course that's certainly not what I wanted the book to accomplish.
Well, it's not.
We'll see. We will see. It's very graphic. We'll see. We'll see.
Have you been approached by any movie or television production?
Nobody. I've been approached, but not by anybody who I would consider a serious candidate. But I think it's too early,
No.
and the book is up for all kinds of prizes. Yesterday was the finalist round of the UK's Wingate Prize. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, your uncle went through multiple slave labor.
Yes.
Can you talk about that? He describes them as in the book. Am I right?
Yes. So he describes the 14 months between when he was deported and when he was liberated. He was liberated by the Red Army, literally in the last week of the war, which was early May 1945. He was in a part of what was then Greater Germany, is today Poland. He went to Auschwitz. He went through the notorious selection process where the vast majority of people were sent directly to the gas chambers, and about 20% were the lucky ones, and they were sent to slave labor camps. He was
How
at
old was he
three
at the
different
time?
ones.
Yeah, how old
He
was
was
he?
he was 39 years old,
39.
and yes,
Wow, that's
and
old, isn't
that
it?
is one of the reasons why the book has the power that it is, because unlike, for example, Primo Levi's book or Imre Kertész's book, which won the Nobel Prize, uh, these books are through the eyes of young children or young people, which is what they were. And he was a seasoned journalist, and so he incorporates into the personal narrative historical commentary, which makes it very powerful. So he takes on he asks, for example, how is it the German people, these people who gave so much to civilization, science and literature and the arts and so on, how could they descend to this, this depravity? And he talks about this and many other philosophical issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to get back to the camps, so he was in three different camps. The last camp was what's called a cold crematorium. So during the war, the Nazis used slave labor extensively, and Jewish slave labor was these people were not slaves the way we think of slaves, like we had in the American South or in other places. These people, they were temporary slaves. The idea was to work them to death. As soon as they could not work, they went into the gas chambers until the very last months of the war. So their lifespan was anywhere between 2 and 4 months. After 4 months, they were done. But in the last part of the war, the local German commanders thought that they knew they were losing the war. They thought that they may be held personally accountable. In fact, that never happened. But they thought they might be personally accountable. And rather than sending them directly to the gas chambers, they sent them to these camp hospitals, where they were their rations were further cut. They had no clothes. They were naked. Heating was cut down, and they even introduced typhus by bringing in infected patients from other camps. And that is what the prisoners call the cold crematorium, as opposed to the hot crematorium. József was near death when he was liberated.
Yeah, he credits a camp doctor named Farkas
Yes.
with his survival. Talk about that.
Well, as I said, hunger drove everything. And Germans instituted a system of kapos, where for exchange, usually it was food, for access to food. Kapos were given enormous
privileges. Kapos were Jews. Kapos were fellow Jews.
They were fellow Jews, and they were the first line work supervisors. And some of them were absolutely brutal. Some of them, like Farkas, use their positions to help their fellow prisoners. So Farkas, and he was doing this really at danger to his own life.
Yes,
He
sure.
would steal medicines and he would distribute those to needy prisoners. But there were,
Yeah, that saved them.
there were a few people, few among the capos who were helpful. A lot of them were absolutely brutal. Among the Germans, he only mentioned one man who showed humanity, and this was a former bartender from Breslau, who would light a cigarette and then drop it on the ground on purpose. And the inmates, and many of them were addicted to,
Yes.
To nicotine, would pick them up and enjoy that. Yeah.
Right, right. Good story. You brought along some slides.
My uncle's, this is Yugoslavia. So he was in that little oval area of Yugoslavia occupied by Hungary. So he suffered the same as the Hungarian Jews. He was in so-called forced labor battalions, but the worst came in the spring of '44 when he and something like 650,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz and other death camps. It's a very well documented deportation from this area called Bachka. You can see my uncle there. This is, by the way, the slide which shows the can you see the dots?
Yes, 42,000.
Yeah, okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So
42.5. Yes.
this is the ramp. This is well, obviously the crematoria. This is where he worked. These were a system of tunnels. It was called Project Reese, and it was intended to house the Nazi leadership in case they had to flee from the oncoming Russian and Allied soldiers. So here's a short clip which describes what happens to the prisoners when they first arrive.
33031. That's my number. Starting now, I'm no longer me, but 33031. Much more a number than, say, an inmate with a life sentence, whose identity and possessions are kept in a prison office. I was never one for numbers. I didn't believe in their magic. My measure of value has always been words. My capacity to remember numbers is so weak that I've forgotten my own phone number at times. And yet, now, the sole distinguishing mark of my future existence is etched into me within moments. The family and given names among the voluminous data on my birth certificate, and the nicknames by which my mother and my sweetheart once called me disappear. 33031 33031 is what I'm called from now on. In this alone, and in nothing else, am I different from 74516 or 125993.
This is the ones who are still working. This is what they look like. This is what my uncle would have looked like. He was near death. My uncle speaks about how German companies we know today, like Mercedes-Benz and Deutsche Bank and Siemens and you name it, they were deeply embedded in the German war economy, and they all used slave labor. Yoshi names names. This company, that's the same company making those tunnels. They're in Dortmund. You go on their website. There's no mention of World War II and certainly no mention of the use of slave labor. My mother was in another camp. Again, a company, coincidence, in Dortmund. Again, you go on the website, nothing about slave labor. And my uncle speaks about collaboration, both in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and how what I call the beginning of Holocaust amnesia starts even before the end of World War II. He describes very dramatically how the people in the towns around this this area, they would put on a great show. They would rip up pictures of Hitler and claim they knew nothing about what was happening in their immediate vicinity. I talk about how his great fear was that people would not believe. This is what Eisenhower, the first time he came to a camp, can you see what it says here on the side, what Eisenhower said? Is that all on?
Get it all on record now, get the
Now,
films.
get the films, get the witnesses, because somewhere down this road of history, some bastard will get up and say that this never happened.
You know that Eisenhower directed that the people in the community be forced to come, the Germans, come in and see for themselves. Yeah. He said, I want them to see, because they lived only a short distance away and claimed they never knew anything.
Yeah.
He said, I want them to see.
Yeah. Even if they hadn't seen, the smell was overpowering. Overpowering. And remember, this was going on for years. These locked trains, they were coming in day after day, week after week, month after month. When the Hungarian Jews were being destroyed, they were murdering 12,000 people a day. 12,000 people a day.
Yeah. In fact, you make a point of saying that you went out of your way to find the right person to translate this book. You had to find just the right person.
I had to find the right translator because I realized that it was the language of the work that really was what made it a masterpiece. And I found a person called Paul Olshvari, and the way I found it was I went through the last 10 years of, I identified the people who had won awards from organizations such as PEN for the best translations from Hungarian to English. And I shortlisted 4 of them. I gave them a chapter to translate. I interviewed them via Zoom, and Paul, I went actually to see, and he did a marvelous job of making this book really shine. It feels, obviously, it's a novel about something in a different country. You know, people speaking a different language, a different history, but it's very compelling, and it feels very fresh, very fresh.
I appreciate it. Again, the name of the book is called Cold Crematorium. Alex Bruner, he's the nephew of the author of the book, and your uncle died in what year?
In 1978.
Yeah, that's
died at the age of 73.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Well, I thank you so much for joining us this half hour. And
okay.
Very good. Thank you. My name is Stewart Ain. This has been Jewish Life. Until next week. Have a good one.